Hello, everyone. We're Dogtopia. My name's Tony. This is Lorraine, our environmental biologist, and we are going to go through all things Thanksgiving safety today. So thanks for joining us. We'll give a few minutes for more people to join, and then we'll get everything kicked off. But we know that it's very tempting to feed dogs food from the Thanksgiving table. So we wanted to go through a lot of holiday safety tips to make sure everyone has a safe and happy Thanksgiving this year. So from everything, including side dishes, desserts, turkey, ham, it's all safe for dogs. Lorraine's gonna go through some things that are safe and not safe. So let's start off with the good part, all of the food that we get to eat soon. Do you wanna start off, I guess, with the main event, the turkey? Is that safe for dogs to eat?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Tony. I'm excited to be here again, and I hope that we have some helpful tips for you today. So yes, absolutely. Let's start with the main event, the turkey. Everyone's going to be excited for turkey on Thanksgiving. I can just already imagine what the smell is like in our home. And of course, it's going to be incredibly delicious smelling to our pups as well. So the most important thing to think about with turkey is that you want to avoid that excess fatty skin. You want to make sure that, I always say, like, stick to the white meat as much as possible. You don't want to necessarily increase their salt intake or their fat intake. So the dark meat definitely has a little bit more fat in it. It's also, I think, sometimes a little more delicious in some respects, but avoid the spices as well that sometimes the turkey is cooked in.
Okay. I guess bones. Are bones okay for dogs to eat? I know give a dog a bone is like a saying, but
don't give a dog a turkey bone, especially any kind of cooked poultry. Chicken, turkey fall into that category. Oftentimes, cooked bird bones can be especially brittle, and if a dog were to go and chomp on it and try to devour that delicious bone, they'll splinter easily into razor sharp pieces.
No. Okay.
Yeah, and so unfortunately that could lead to an intestinal blockage, or even, God forbid, an actual perforation of intestine, that kind of thing. That's a real emergency. So I always like to tell people to stay away from poultry bones, especially after they're cooked, and you certainly wouldn't want to give one a raw, turkey bone, that kind of thing. So making sure that that's the case.
Yeah. One of my favorite foods is the stuffing. Is stuffing okay for dogs?
No, not really, because there's probably 100 different ways stuffing can be made. The recipes are just all over the place, but oftentimes they're made with onions, leeks, garlic. They can even have things like raisins. Some people like to do kind of a sweet and savory stuffing. So making sure that you avoid raisins, which we know are toxic to dogs, and even potentially cranberries.
Ooh, like that. Yeah, that's helpful to know. Are cranberries good for dogs outside of the stuffing, or?
Yes and no. So this one's a little tricky. Cranberries in moderation are fine, and they're not necessarily toxic to your pups. But sometimes, cranberries can be mixed with other dried fruits. So there you might have the risk of running into some raisins. But, cranberries given in moderation are fine. They can cause some upset stomach in higher doses and larger quantities. But also things like cranberry sauce and other recipes that we use cranberries in could have things like excessive amounts of sugar or even alcohol, or even made like think about a cranberry sauce that might be made with a grape juice or something as part of its ingredients. So because we're not really sure what's in every one of those ingredients, you should always err on the side of caution.
Yes. What other fruits? I guess, apples. Dogs can have apples.
Are good. We finally have landed on one that's okay. Yes. So apple slices are a good healthy snack. Just avoid the core and the seeds. Things like that.
Everything before it goes into the pie, basically. Yes.
Exactly.
What about, let's see, the vegetables? We have green beans. Can we have green beans? Dogs
green beans
are okay?
Are absolute yes. They can. They're excellent. They're a great treat, especially if they're steamed. I would avoid the green bean casserole because you don't necessarily want that creamy soup, all those other ingredients like fat and salt, butter and salt, that kind of thing. So steamed plain green beans for sure. Even raw would be good.
Nothing fun for the dogs. What about carrots? Yeah, carrots are fine.
Absolutely. Carrots, 100% raw, even steamed is good. Avoid them if they're dripping in glaze, like brown sugar and honey or butter. Absolutely.
Let's see, what else do we eat? Mashed potatoes.
Yeah, mashed potatoes are great, especially if you haven't added things like the milk and the cream and the butter and the salt. Here I go again. You just, plain Jane recipes are best for dogs. Sometimes mashed potatoes could even have things like garlic or onions kind of diced up, or sauteed onions in that recipe. So always remember, again, onions and garlic are not okay for dogs.
No-nos for dogs. Another potato, the sweet potato, that's okay for our dogs.
Sweet potatoes are very good. They're a good source of fiber and vitamins. They will definitely, be a nice sweet treat for your pup, but just make sure to avoid the butter and the sugar again.
And I guess gravy is not good for humans, so is it good for dogs?
Gravy is definitely not good for just about anyone. It tastes amazing, and it's definitely one of the stars of the day, but I would definitely avoid gravy for your dog.
Okay. And then dessert, pumpkin pie. Pumpkin's okay.
Pumpkin is good.
Again,
just like sweet potatoes, it's on the list. Lots of good vitamins and fiber. It's often even used to help dogs if they have like canned pumpkin, plain straight canned pumpkins, often used for dogs that may be experiencing upset stomach or nervous tummies or loose stool, that kind of thing. But pumpkin pie is not so great. It's going to have lots of sugar and butter and that crust and stuff the pups just don't need.
Yes.
So the treat would be just the canned pumpkin. That would be definitely a treat for them.
I know we talked a lot about the garlic and the onions and raisins. Are there other foods that dogs should avoid this Thanksgiving?
Yes. I always like to remind you to remember that artificial sweeteners like xylitol are actually very toxic for dogs. So if you have anyone out there who's kind of doing some artificial sweeteners, just keep an eye on that.
Okay.
And just to go back to the onion garlic family, it's part of the alumni family, and it's toxic to dogs and cats. So I just want to remind you that, and it's weird, this toxin can take a while to show up. So oftentimes you can think, oh, they did fine, they had a little treat or they got into something, and you're not noticing any symptoms, but it can take a while. The symptoms will show up, and then they'll suddenly feel weak or sick.
Okay.
And then you have to kind of remember what's happened and maybe what they got into to put two and two together to realize they may have had some exposure to onions or garlic.
Okay.
So
very serious.
Yeah. It's definitely something you want to avoid.
Okay.
Yeah, so back to raisins and grapes, just one more thing, it can cause kidney failure. So if you are concerned that your dog has gotten into grapes or raisins, it's a trip to the doctor. You want to make sure you get to see a veterinarian right away.
And obviously chocolate.
Yeah, chocolate. We talked about that on our last Facebook live post for Halloween. We definitely got into a lot chocolate. Of that. There's the compound theobromide in chocolate that is the toxic part of chocolate to dogs, and there's all different risks between the white chocolate having the lowest amount of risk to our dogs all the way to dark chocolate and everything in between. But keep in mind, it's really about the size and weight of your dog and how much they ingest. But all chocolate needs to be kept away from your pups. All desserts like that contain chocolate. Sure.
Alcohol, not good for dogs either.
No, alcohol is not good for our dogs. And it's funny to think that, of course, we wouldn't want our dog to sip our beer or anything like that. But I want to mention it just because it can often be found in a lot of holiday recipes. So just take note that if you've got a rum cake or a fruit cake on the table and your pup gets into it, that they might also be contending with alcohol in their system.
Okay.
Not good.
Anything else we should be aware of?
Really, I guess I would just mention bread dough. Bread itself is not dangerous unless, of course, it has raisins or onions or anything else we've already mentioned. But bread dough that's unbaked can have that yeast. And so if they consume that, you can imagine that warm, moist environment inside your dog's stomach while it's still rising or still having some chemical reactions there could lead to an emergency trip to the vet. Yeah. So really, it comes down to making sure that if you are going to let your dog indulge in a little treat in Thanksgiving, that you're doing it before you've added all the other ingredients. So, vegetables by themselves or really just plain white pieces of turkey would be a nice treat. But really, the best thing to do is keep them on their normal diet. You don't want to be spending the day, dealing with a dog with loose stool and having to run out every 15 minutes. You would really much prefer to be enjoying the day with your guests and yourself and your family rather than dealing with a sick dog. So definitely keep it minimal.
Okay. And you mentioned like loose stool. Are there other signs that you should watch for to say that your dog may have gotten into something or you should be concerned?
Yeah, good question. So you know your dog best, and you know sort of what looks out of the ordinary, and if your dog ain't doing right. So ain't doing right is actually a term that some veterinarians use when a pet parent brings their pup in and says, I don't know what's wrong. They don't really want to eat. She doesn't want to go for a walk this morning. She just doesn't seem like she feels good. That's sort of the beginning stages of something might be going on.
Okay.
So watch for ain't doing right signs. You know your dog best, and you know if use your intuition. If she's not really feeling well, something might be happening. But of course, the more obvious signs are things like lethargy, vomiting, diarrhea, and then like some more significant symptoms would be, seizure, muscle tremors. Those things I would relate to really heavy doses of chocolate toxicity. So,
Just be mindful.
You're doing right. Watch for that.
Okay.
Okay, so it's your turn, Tony. We're going to ask you some questions. So if you're hosting a large Thanksgiving, what are some tips that pet parents should consider for their dogs?
Okay, so it's important that everyone, including your guests and your dog, are safe and comfortable at the home. Your dog can get very anxious with visitors. There's a lot of commotion happening. You're opening the door a bunch. So you might want to consider using a crate or even just a special room in the house to keep them in, or a place for them to escape to if they ever get overwhelmed. You could occupy them with a nice special treat, a nice holiday treat for them that is safe that we just went over, to make it a more comfortable experience. And the safe place is not just to address possible barking concerns, but general safety as well. So dogs tend to get anxious or overly stressed, and that could react to some of your guests. And we want to avoid that situation at all possible. So just make sure that your dog is comfortable, guests are comfortable. That's like a very important thing for Thanksgiving. And you also want to be mindful of the door. Like I mentioned earlier, the doorbell is going to be ringing. Door dashing is a very, very real concern. If you know that your dog is prone to sneaking out or going on adventures through the neighborhood, this is definitely something to be mindful of. Make sure you plan ahead. You could either leash the dog, something we talked about during our Halloween Facebook Live, or you could put up a baby gate, either at the front door or maybe in the hallway, to help with that entering and exiting of the guests. And maybe you just leave the door open, have the gate there to avoid the doorbell altogether. This just kind of helps alleviate that situation of the dog getting out. Also, you want to make sure that you are keeping all food or even decorations away from the counter's edge. If you know that your dog can reach the counter or likes to get up there sometimes, maybe jumping up, just something also to be mindful of on the holiday season. You tend to put food out. Maybe you make a nice buffet. Maybe you put like nuts and candies on the side of the couch for guests to nosh on. These are just things that dogs can definitely get into, no matter the size or the age of the dog. They can find a way. So something to be mindful of as well. You also want to make sure that you are keeping the trash secured. This is a really important one. Who knows what kind of trouble your dog could get into if they found their way into the trash bag, not only just for like the plastic bag itself, but everything inside. So all the things we just went over that weren't safe for them, like the turkey bones, plastic wrappers, foil wrappers, the twine that you would wrap the turkey with, any uneaten food, like, desserts, paper napkins, anything. Like, it's all a hazard for dogs. So
it smells delicious to them.
They're going to think it smells wonderful, but make sure you keep it secure and you get it out of the house or you put it in the dumpster just as quickly as possible to avoid any sort of emergency vet trip on Thanksgiving.
My dog's gotten into the trash.
It's not good.
It was messy.
And you're like, uh-oh, that was my own fault.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
It's also just important to note that during the holiday season, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening at the house. You're running in and out of the house. Do your best to keep your dog's routine as simple and as normal as possible. Keep their feeding times the same. Keep their medication, intake the same. Do everything you can to make sure it's as normal as possible. And then another thing you can do if you are going to be hosting a big Thanksgiving and you do have a dog at the home, exercise early and before all of your guests arrive. This way you have like a tired dog and a happy dog just hanging out in the corner. They'll be a little bit more well-behaved when all of the guests arrive, and one less thing for you to worry about. So go on a nice family walk with the dog.
That's good for you.
Everyone can use it. Get your steps in before you consume all the calories. It'll be good for everyone involved. And then this is another important one in terms of the guests that you are having, and maybe there's going to be a lot of children over at the house. Dogs can get overstimulated by all of the little kids and can get excited or confused by these new people and children at the house. So watch for signs that your dog might need a little bit of a break from the party. And so make sure you do have that safe and comfortable space set up for them to kind of just chill out, get back to their normal behavior. And then if you do know that your dog is a little aggressive with food, I feel like you would know that or not. Just make sure that when it does come time for the main meal and everyone sits down, that you do something with your dog. Maybe that's like keeping them outside or remove them from the room or tether, with the leash during dinner so that everyone can enjoy their meal. And then you know your dog best, so just make sure you're your best advocate for your dog. They're your best friend and you should be theirs. Just make sure that they're happy and safe and comfortable. Same with the guests too. Make sure that you communicate that there is going to be a dog at the home. If there are any sort of allergies or you need to make guests aware of that you are going to have a dog at the home, make sure everyone's comfortable and you can kind of coordinate that ahead of time so there are no surprises on the big day.
Good. Excellent.
Another thing I guess you could do as well, if you don't want to go through all of those steps to make sure your dog's comfortable, you can always board your dog at Dogtopia for one night or maybe multiple nights during the holiday season. It's a great way for them to kind of play with other dogs, have a safe and restful night's sleep, and one less thing for you to worry about. You'll have peace of mind. All great things to consider. Did I cover everything? I think
you did.
Okay.
The only thing I would mention is one other little hazard that can happen during Thanksgiving is when your guests come. Sometimes they like to bring a hostess gift, or they might, bring you some flowers or something nice like that to say thank you for hosting. Or even you're ready to decorate your home. You think about those poinsettias, bulb flowers like lilies and amaryllis are really popular this time of year. So I would just like to mention that the amaryllis is part of the same family, Amaryllidaceae, as the garlic and onions and leeks that we've already mentioned, and chives as well. So if you consider that whole family of plants is actually very toxic to dogs, remember that sometimes decorative plants can be as well.
Okay.
So just another tip.
Just keep it all away from the dog.
Exactly.
Err on the side of caution.
Okay, so moving on. Another really important tip this time of year, we mentioned door dashing and how that, just with all the commotion and visitors and different stops you're making in and out, door dashing is definitely a concern. I always like to really mention the importance of making sure your dog has ID tags up to date and also a microchip, because an ID tag can often, come off on a collar if they slip out of their collar or their leash or something like that. I know that just the other day, my own lab, she slipped right out of her own collar, but luckily she's microchipped. And so her information is tied to my information. If she were to ever get away from the home or our neighborhood, then she would definitely be tied to us and we could get her back quickly, which would be very important. So I like to mention that. Even if you're like tying a festive bandana on the dog and taking off their own collar, if they get out, it's very helpful to microchip and make sure that information doesn't go anywhere. I'm a huge advocate for microchips, for sure. And so I know we've talked a lot about hosting a Thanksgiving, but maybe you want to, or maybe you're traveling this Thanksgiving. So we're going to go through a few holiday safety tips with travel. First off, things to pack. You want to make sure you have additional tags of where you're going, the number and the address of where you'll be staying, and have that somehow incorporated to the dog in case they get off or get out of your sight. Just one thing extra to kind of as a precaution. Make sure you have enough food with you for your dog. Maybe you can ship it there ahead of time. All depends on how long you're going for. Make sure you have a copy of your vet records. Always important. Every pet parent should have that available. Just one less thing to worry about in the event that you do need to visit a vet in a different area than you currently live. Make sure you have enough medication as well. Sometimes that's one thing you can forget about. So make sure you have the medication available and trying to keep their routine as normal as possible. Make sure they're up to date on vaccinations, whether you're traveling or not. It's important to note. And then make sure that everything that you're traveling with properly fits your dog. So their leash, their harness, and their carrier as well. And if you're traveling by car, make sure there's a seatbelt. So you want to make sure they're safely secured depending on how you're transporting your pup. Always making sure they're properly restrained in the car. Dogs can get car sick as well. So it's important to travel on an empty stomach or just not on a full stomach.
and make sure you're taking frequent water breaks. It probably will take you a little bit longer to get there because of all the times that you are stopping, but it's much more comfortable for the dog. Dogs tend to get dehydrated during a car trip, so you want to make sure that their water intake is right and you're stopping enough for those potty breaks.
Sometimes my dog won't even take a drink when I offer it to her when we're traveling, so I just think the more often you try that, the better. Absolutely.
And then also, for anyone, don't leave the dog in the car for an extended period of time. You know, the temperatures can change, and that affects obviously the in-car temperature. A great tip if you are traveling by car this season, to do a lot of takeout food so that you don't have to leave the dog in the car for an extended period of time instead of sitting down at a restaurant. So just a simple tip that you can do so they're not only alone or stressed, but not having to worry about the different temperature. And now I guess if you are traveling by airplane, so there's been a lot of news about pet travel on airplanes. So just make sure you are checking with the airline if you do plan to travel with your pet on a plane this season. Check with the airline, make sure that you know any sort of regulation or restrictions that you need to be aware of. Small dogs need to be in a well-ventilated carrier that can fit in under the seat in front of you. So that's a very small dog. The space probably isn't available for the exit rows. So if you know that that's where you typically like to sit, you'll have to switch your ticket for a different seat so that you can accommodate the pet that you're traveling with. And your pet carrier does count as a carry-on, unfortunately. Not, anyone who's an overpacker, you'll probably have to check a few extra bags if you are traveling with the dog. And then the carrier does need to be TSA approved, and it can't weigh more than 20 pounds. So that includes the dog and the carrier. So if you have any questions, make sure you just check with your airline ahead of time. They make the rules. We have to follow them.
Absolutely. Good tips. Excellent. I'd like to just kind of add on to that. Sometimes your airline will require what they call a travel certificate or a health certificate. And oftentimes these have to be issued within 48 hours of travel from a veterinarian. So make sure that if you're traveling by air that you've really read carefully what their requirements are, because you'll need to have that appointment set by your veterinarian within that 48-hour time frame. And this is really to ensure that they don't have any contagious diseases or anything that would, any condition that might be transferable to either humans or other pets. And some airlines have breed restrictions too, unfortunately. Brachycephalic breeds, the snub-nosed breeds, the pugs and the French bulldogs, that kind of thing. Some of them are restricted on how they can fly and when. So I think that it's important just to kind of take note of that. The some airlines require your puppy to be at least 16 weeks of age. So they need to be old enough to fly, and obviously that means that they also need to be current on all their vaccines. That includes rabies, because every state has a rabies requirement. And also I'm a real advocate for things like the canine influenza vaccine, the Bordetella vaccine, and of course our distemper parvo for sure. So making sure you're up to date. That's good. And so when you get to the airport, you're going to want to have enough time to get through security. You're going to want to understand where all those pet potty places are in those new places that our airlines and airports are beginning to accommodate pet travelers a little bit easier. So if you have a connecting flight, you're going to want to know in the terminal exactly where you need to head. So it's great because a lot of those airports will have a terminal map, and you'll know what gate you're going to. Check ahead of time, get a plan, and try not to be stressed out. Try to give yourself enough time to consider, because once you get to security, you will have to take your pup out of their carrier. They will scan the carrier through x-ray, and then you'll be able to place your pup back in. So you'll need a small leash with you. You can't just hold them unleashed, so and just try to keep your cool, because that whole process can be really challenging for anyone
with or without
traveling
an
with
animal.
a pet. Exactly. So, and airline staff, unfortunately, we live in a time where, there can be some people or decisions made that can be difficult or frustrating. But airline staff do have the right to remove you from a flight, or delay you, or deny you actually boarding a flight if they believe your dog might be acting aggressively or inappropriate. And I meant to mention that some airlines also require a behavior voucher. I've never heard this before. This is kind of new for me. So a behavior voucher is something that a veterinarian would actually vouch for the dog having good behavior and could get through the airline flight well. So making sure that you're following all the rules of the airline, I think, is going to make it a lot less stressful in the long run.
Plan ahead, follow the rules. And then all of this sounds so ridiculously overwhelming, because it can be. Traveling with a pet, regardless of your mode of transportation, is a lot. It's a lot to plan for. Again, consider boarding your dog at Dogtopia. You should just ask yourself, does my dog really want to go on this trip? Will I have time to maintain his or her routine? You know, am I going to be able to walk them, get them proper exercise? Does my dog think that traveling is fun? Do they find it stress-free? Will they enjoy the final destination of where they're going? If something starts to happen, maybe they start to get car sick, or you find out mid-flight that they hate flying. Are you prepared to, kind of change your holiday plans? Those are things you have to consider. And if you're answering yes or no to some of these questions, you might have to decide, what's right and what's best for your dog, and maybe change your holiday plans and board your pup instead of travel with them. So take a look at our website, dogtopia.com, find a location near you, and check to see if there are still spaces available for boarding. It's always better to have your dog safe and happy and comfortable instead of in an environment that they don't appreciate. So
exactly.
Yeah, let's see. I believe we got one question in. Hi, David.
Hi, David.
Are dogs impacted by tryptophan by getting extra sleepy if they eat turkey?
That's
great
a great question.
question.
I think that there's some kind of mixed studies out there that show that the tryptophan doesn't necessarily cause people to be sleepy. What causes people to be sleepy after heavy meals is the digestion it takes and the blood supply that changes in our bodies when we have a big heavy meal. Plus, oftentimes we are more sleep deprived and we've been up early. I know sometimes
You're starting the turkey
4 or 5
early.
in the morning in order to roast the turkey to start eating by lunchtime, that kind of thing. So oftentimes I think that there's a little bit of a myth about how much tryptophan actually causes people to become sleepy. So I haven't heard of it actually causing any dogs to be sleepy.
Okay.
It's such a great question. But certainly from all the activity and a big heavy meal, that can require anyone to have naps, especially maybe a glass or two of wine. That would always make me sleepy.
But white meat, if you're going to give it.
White meat.
No
exactly.
skin. Keep it clean as much as possible.
Exactly.
Well, we thank everyone for tuning in for our Thanksgiving Live. We'll announce our next one, which will be holiday themed, probably new puppy focused, because lots of people get new puppies during the holiday season. So we'll schedule that soon. We thank everyone for tuning in. If you have any other questions, feel free to comment and we can definitely reply back. So thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to see you. Thanks.